Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to do another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. Today we're going to be covering the historic best of one format. We cover all the formats here on Arena, whether it be best of one, best of three. We do standard, explorer, historic. We even cover alchemy from time to time. We do specific videos for metagame challenges or events. So for example, if you're looking to play in the Explorer metagame challenge this weekend, I have a full video covering a bunch of different deck options that you can play there. So if you do enjoy this type of content, like I said, we come out every week. We have a sub goal at the bottom of the screen that you'll see 10,000 subs on YouTube. We're just shy of 500 and change away. So greatly appreciate if you can. So we are going to jump off. We're looking historic best of one format. As always, we're going to look at the meta popularity of decks, kind of see what the trends are, what decks people are playing, and then we'll look into the specifics in terms of win rates. So one thing to always preface, popular decks are not necessarily the highest win rate decks. People could enjoy playing a deck, but it doesn't, or like it could be fun, like this crazy concept of playing fun decks, but it doesn't necessarily correlate to the highest win rate. We're going to get the data from UntapGG, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, tracks win rate data, aggregates it, shows it on the screen. We'll add that in with all the deck lists in the video description so you can copy paste to your heart content. So we'll look at the last week. This is the last kind of week of July. Most popular deck is Izzet Wizards, followed by Colorless Paradox Outcome Storm. So this is kind of a combo deck. Then we have Rakdos Ring, which is the Rakdos mid-range deck. We have a few different variants of Dredge. So Dredge has become very popular. It is a ton of fun to play. We'll cover a couple different deck lists. So we have the Dimir variant, as well as the Sultai variant. Mono Green Elves showing up in terms of popularity. Selesnya Squirrel Twin, like the Helioak or Rosie combo. And then Abzan Sacrifice, which is the Sam combo. So we're not going to look at win rate of the day. We'll look at like the last week because I think it's a better representation. But I like to just kind of look at the trends in terms of what's happening. So Izzet Wizards was hovering for the last week or so at like almost 20% of the meta. So it's a very popular deck in best of one. If we look at the paradoxical outcome deck, we see it peaking at about 16% and then drop down to 11. So this went from non-existent to like 12%. It's probably likely associated with like a content creator. Usually I'll try to attribute when I can, but I don't know where this one came from. We look at the ring decks. We're going to obviously see a decline around the time of the set release for Explorer Anthology and Historic Anthology. This was around the time of the ban as well. Or sorry, the nerf of Crucius. So we see that kind of progress kind of low. Similarly, we see the Dredge deck pick up in terms of popularity with the Explorer release. With the historic release because we got Bloodghast in that there. So interesting kind of stats with stuff like that. Just seeing if anything else relevant here, but we'll jump into it. And we're looking July 20th through the 27th, Platinum to Mythic rank, 36,000 games of Magic played. And we're going to cover Dredge first. So the Sultai Dredge, at least Platinum to Mythic rank, had the highest win rate. If we're looking specifically at Mythic, it was a very small sample size, so I didn't want to focus on just there. But if we look at just Mythic, the Dimir version does have a higher win rate relative to the Sultai version. So we're going to cover both, give you the options. I played a Sultai version. This deck is a ton of fun. And there's a couple different variants, but so this one's at 63% win rate. The core of the deck is you want to self-mill yourself, ideally on your turn, and you use stuff like Otherworldly Gaze to put cards from your library into your graveyard. Stitcher Supplier, Glimpse the Unthinkable, normally used to mill your opponent, you're actually milling yourself. And then if you hit cards like Narcomoeba, if it was to put in your library from your, if it was put in your graveyard from your library, you get to put it into play instead. If you hit Creeping Chill, you get to cast it for free. Notably, this is life lost, so it doesn't get around ring damage. And then if you play lands, if your Bloodghast is in the graveyard, you get to bring it back. When a creature enters the battlefield, you then get to bring Prize Amalgam back at your end step. So it is important to understand the timing sequence of your steps. So if you plan on doing it, you need to put the stop before your second main phase. So that way it comes back at the beginning of the next upkeep. Otherwise, it will come back at the next player's end step. So when you hit 3 life, you get to bring back Silver Smoke Ghouls. You can discard cards from your hand and then return Haunted Dead. This is the card I'm like least enjoying when I played it. You tend to not have cards in your hand. You're playing a lot from your top of the deck. You're playing a low land count. You usually don't have much to discard. But when you can, this is kind of like a sneak factor. Grizzly Salvage puts cards in the yard. Founding lets you free cast stuff. Mill, and then kind of cast stuff from your graveyard. And then you have Driven Despair. So pull this up on the Gather, because everybody knows these half-half cards. So you can cast this from your hand, the green portion. So basically giving your creatures trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to the player, you draw a card. And then you can cast Despair, so until the end of the turn, creatures you control gain Menace, and when this creature deals combat damage to the player, that player discards a card. So it gives you kind of two ways to cast. So you can cast this part from your graveyard as well if you mill it over. From there, we go to the Dimir variant. So in Mythic rank, this one is at 57% win rate, and this is 240 games. So similar kind of concept, Creeping Chill, Silver Smoke, Prize Amalgam, same kind of cards there. This has got a couple more in terms of 1-drops. You have Merfolk Seeker Keeper that can mill yourself, as well as Minister of Inquiries. I think it's wrong. Honestly, one of the best cards in the deck playing it is the Otherworldly Gaze. I would much rather play that than the Minister of Inquiries. Because you can mill it over, you could do it on your upkeep. It lets you kind of sort through this and gives you controlled mill. So sometimes you want to find a land. You're usually playing low land count decks in this format, like this kind of structure. So it helps you kind of structure your draws in that respect. So give you a couple different iterations of that deck there. From there, we'll go to the Izzet Wizards deck. So this is 62% win rate, the most played deck. And it's your Wizards tribal deck, so you're using Symmetry Sages to buff your team, prowess cards like Soulscar Mage. If you can buff the power of Dreadhorde Arcanist with either Symmetry Sage or Balmor, then you could cast higher CMC cards, so 2 or 3 mana cards. Lots of burn in the deck between Ranger's Firebrand, Static Discharge, and Wizard's Lightning. All these can go face, and you could rebuy them. Flame of Anor is a main deck way to deal Shieldred, as well as draws you some cards and can potentially destroy an artifact in a pinch. You can do the Ring Tempts You, so making your creatures pseudo unblockable. They have 1 power when they attack, and then you can cast spells to give prowess ability. It also lets you draw a discard and get some effects like that too. The Reckless Charge kind of surprise burst damages out for your opponent, so you can haste out any of your threats. We then go to, so this is actually just Squirrel Twin. So this is the kind of stock version. There's a version as well that plays Rosie, the uncommon from Lord of the Rings. Rosie also combos with Helioak and doesn't require a life gain card. So it's something you might want to consider there. But Heliod, Skirioak, and anything that gains a life when it enters the battlefield lets you do an infinite loop where the Heliod puts a counter on Skirioak, makes a token, gains you a life, and then you get to put a token on, or a counter on it, and then repeat the process infinite times. You have the Fair Game of Trelasara and Voice of the Blessed that just get bigger when you gain life, and then you have Skyclave Apparition as removal, and then a Johnny Ultimate can be a one-sided board wipe. You're playing that in a Collected Company shell. This mana base can also be improved by playing the Fast Lines and the Pain Lines from the most recent set. So this one's a little bit dated of a version. If you want to play the the Rosie Oak version of the deck, I'll link it in the comments or in the video description. I think that one's more resilient, gives you 2 combos, and it's not reliant on solely the life link element of the deck. It's also got the improved mana base. So if you want to play this but just tweak the mana base, use the other mana base instead. It's a little bit better. We then go to No Color Paradox Storm. So this is a deck that I'm missing a lot of cards from, but with the advent of the ring, this lets you draw a bunch of cards, which is one of the things the deck's missing. So what you're trying to do here is play a bunch of mana rocks, Cold Steel Heart, Guardian Idol, Mind Stone, and then use Paradox Engine. So whenever you cast a spell, you get to untap all your permanents. You untap these mana rocks, that lets you reuse the mana. You then have things like Cloud Key and Semblance Anvil. Both of these allow you to kind of exile a card or name a card, and then they get cost reduction. So effectively what you're trying to do is make your artifacts cost as little to no mana as possible. With Mystic Forge, you can play cards off the top of your library. and then you kind of chain through all your effects. You can Karn for so it's actually interesting because they have the Aetherflux Reservoir. So they're playing one Reservoir main, one in the side, but you're basically just getting to the point where you put down the Aetherflux Reservoir, cast Forsaken Paradox Engine, and then just go to town. Cast cards from the top of your library, and then you can mill your opponent. You can also, with the enough cost reduction that's available in your deck, or if you can basically generate 4 mana each turn, you can just you fetch the Ancestral Statue, and then just repeatedly cast it with Karn, or with Paradox Engine out, and then it bounces, comes back to your hand each turn, so it gets you infinite cast triggers to either generate infinite mana, or to get you infinite life with the Aetherflux Reservoir or Forsaken Monument. So you have some like utility lands, things to scry, stuff like that with the mana base itself. We then go to Abzan Sacrifice, 59%. So this is another infinite combo. So Samwise, Cauldron Familiar, and Woestrider basically lets you loop the cat. The cat comes into play, it generates a food token, you sacrifice it, it dies, you bring it back with the food token, that generates a new food token, rinse and repeat, you drain your opponent out. This is life loss, so it gets around the ring. You also have the fair game plan of just like Drainsies, Blood Artist, and Zulaport Cutthroat. Blood Artist does target, so it doesn't get around the ring, but Zulaport Cutthroat does because it's each opponent as opposed to target. You have Delighted Halfling for ramp, Priest as a way to kind of sack and kind of get that fair game, pseudo removal. Tyvar helps you dig for pieces and gives haste to the priest's ability. Collect a Company helps you dig, as well as a couple copies of the One Ring to help you dig. Then go to Gruul Goblins. So this is a predominantly mono red but splash green for Cabaretti Revels and Goblin Anarchomancer. The goal of this deck is to play Revels out, and then you just start casting Goblins and then chain through your deck. You could pretty much generate next to infinite mana or close to with Skirk Prospector. The goal is to basically cast stuff using things like Wily Goblin, which can net mana, the Goblin Instigators with a cost reduction, something like the Narcomancer is 1 mana but gives you 2 bodies, so then you can sack it for 2 mana. And the core of the deck is either make a very large board, get haste with the Goblin War Chief, make a bunch of tokens with Krenko. You get the Lord effects in Ruvenald, Balishkmon. When a creature dies, you get to ping, so you have kind of ways around with that. Goblin Influx Array is also another way to reduce the cost of your goblins and provide you more creatures, similar with the Goblin Ringleader. Then go to Rakdos Ring. So this is the deck I got Mythic with this month. Very similar. The only difference, and I'll make the suggestion, is just the Heartless Axe. This deck did get nerfed, so Crucius is now 3-1. So a little worse. It does die to opponent's Bowmasters, but I still think this deck's very well positioned. I'm on a 3-3 split. I'll pull up my version in a sec to compare. But I think if you're playing this version here, so I like Blood Tithe Harvester. It still gives you an early threat. It deals with opponent's Bowmasters. It can be copied with Fable. It gives you something to loot, so it has a bunch of utility there. Similarly, I think if you're playing this deck, you want to have either Go for the Throat or a Braid as one of your cards. We saw that there's a lot of incidental artifacts. A Braid can be quite useful. In this, if we're seeing a lot of Dredge, you can also play things like, I forget the name of it. I can look at my older version. So this is my version of the deck. So it's pretty much similar, but it's 4 rings, 3 Shieldreds, and then I'm on 2 Blood Tithe Harvesters, 1 Abrade, 1 Go for the Throat, and then 2 Inquisitions. But the card that I was playing before, where are you? I've played this deck a lot. It's the 3-1, the Shieldred one. Okay, I'll find it. I'll mention it. But it's a 3-1 that exiles a card on the graveyard. So I think if you're looking at something like that, that could be reasonable against Dredge. You can play Hearse if you want. Just kind of a fair game plan. But for the most part, you're killing things and then winning through like Ring Shieldred shenanigans. I still think Crucius is reasonable. It still is a must-answer threat. And if they don't, then you could kind of just overwhelm them. Having access to Fatal Pushes, a bunch of removal, And then the ring is really good against like wizards because it fogs them for a turn and then often plays them into kind of a bad effect. They commit more to the board. You can kind of beat them that way. I've seen some versions of the deck now kind of shift up into a little bit more control orient. So they're playing some copies of Brotherhood's End in lieu of some copies of Crucius and just kind of playing that range of the deck. You can also, in that case, shift up, go Invoke Despairs, as well as Chandra Torch, or 6 mana double Chandra, Beacon of Hope, or whatever it's called. Be mindful with Invoke Despair. The draw condition is actually could potentially be a negative if your opponent has Orcish Bowmasters out. So, like I said, my version, I was 23-7 before the nerfs with it. It's a very strong deck. And then lastly, I just want to show it so folks are aware. Some people have been asking me to do a Zoo deck. This one's from Ash Lizzle. She was playing in best of 3, so that might be conditioned, but best of 1, it's not doing so hot, 48%. It tends to kind of get outpaced. You are playing 15 lands, but you have the cyclers in Oliphant and Generous Ant that can be cycled for 1 mana to find you any of your dual lands. The format tends to be fairly aggressive, and if all your mana is shocking you, it does hurt you in that respect. So something just to consider with that if you want to play this. I'll link it, but like I said, if you want to have fun, try it out, but it's not putting up the best results in best of 1. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one. And like I said, if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button. Free, easy, and helps out the channel. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one.